Throughout all the years that the internet has existed for, one thing that people love doing more than anything else is scaring people. Whether it's telling a fake story about an altered game, fabricating real-life events, or simply sharing something unsettling that may have happened to someone, people love horror. Horror games, horror movies, horror books. The genre of completely shitting yourself watching, playing, or reading something is something that everyone has dabbled in, whether it's consuming or creating. Though most scary content can be written off as just something to make you jump, few pieces are as in-depth and as special as the web series Petscop. A series with themes so absurd, a storyline so interpretable, and metaphors so detailed and cryptic that people are still making art of the series, making videos about it, and coming up with theories and interpretations over half a decade after the series debuted in March of 2017. Petscop is one of a kind that inspired more web series to follow in its footsteps and revolutionized the style of psychological horror. Watching Petscop is like watching a suspenseful scene in a horror movie, only there is no jump scare. It's just you, the video, and the unbelievably haunting sense of dread you feel while watching it. The way it plays tricks on your mind, the way you feel like something horrific is surely bound to happen, yet it never does. One could say it would be too cheap for a series held to this high of a standard to have a jump scare, though I think it's just because a jump scare wouldn't fit the kind of style Petscop goes for. Throughout the years, countless people have made their own analysis videos of Petscop, discussing the story, the characters, the events that took place throughout the different years, and so on. And you might expect me to say that they have all been flawed and incorrect, etc. But in reality, that's not the case. Petscop is not something that can be objectively solved. We, as the viewer, are not given enough information from the videos to make a factual storyline of every single thing that happens. The way it has been crafted to not only creep the fuck out of you, but to also make you think like nothing else does, is not something to scoff at, and is one of the things that makes Petscop so great. So today, I've gathered the last year and a half's worth of notes I've been making, and I will put it together into a video, looking back on one of the internet's creepiest gems of horror, Petscop. The way this video will be structured is in parts. The first part is the events that led up to the game's creation and what happened during 1997. The second part will focus on the aftermath of 1997 and how Paul ended up making videos 20 years later. And the third and final part will be a summary of the first two, wrapping up this entire series in one big giant finish. And one last thing to get this out of the way, this video will not be objectively correct. No Petscop video is, or will ever be. Though there are quite a few events that do happen and have been proven to be true, most of this video will be my opinions, thoughts, and just my general perspective of Petscop as a web series. Petscop is a one-of-a-kind viewing experience, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I suggest you click away. This is for people who have already watched Petscop and are familiar with it. This video has been well over a month in the making, so I really hope you enjoy my look back on YouTube's scariest fake game, Petscop. The first known event in Petscop occurred in 1968 when Lena Leskowitz is born. She's referred to several times in the game as Boss and is one of the most important characters in Petscop because 9 years later, in 1977, the first major event would occur. The windmill incident. Marvin Mark, who's around the same age as Lena, is believed to have killed her, or at the very least, Lena completely vanished off the face of the earth. However, this took place at a windmill and the same thing happened to the windmill. It vanished. Lena and Marvin were apparently friends, as we're led to believe by a note left by Raina in Petscop 9. Lena also had a sister who was taking pictures of Marvin and Lena in front of the windmill, and just minutes later she took another picture and it was just Marvin, without his friend and without the windmill. After the incident occurred, Marvin attempted to bring her home using birthday cakes and party hats, trying to get the birthday girl to come back since this incident occurred on her 9th birthday, as were very clearly shown in Petscop 9 and 17 respectively. This wouldn't happen though, and Lena would disappear without any explanation. Years later, Lena's sister, whose name is Anna, would end up marrying Marvin. Raina, aka Daniel Hammond, who's not related to Marvin and Anna, was also born around this time, and that's a whole nother timeline there. As for Lena, she would completely vanish for years and years with no real explanation. The only reason this was discovered was due to Raina being suspicious of Marvin and going through his things, as he openly admits in the first line of the same letter that exposes him in Petscop 9. We're shown later in Petscop 9 that when Paul walks down the specific staircase and turns to the right, just like we're told in the note, he turns into the Shadow Monster Man, which is a character used to describe Marvin throughout the game. So we can use that amongst other information that we'll uncover soon to safely say that Petscop was created for Marvin, or was it? When Paul is the Shadow Monster Man in Petscop, he is able to access the windmill and go inside it, unlike when he is his normal guardian sprite and can't see it. When he goes inside the windmill, Paul essentially relives the windmill event by plunging a tool into Lena herself, and when the screen fades back from black, we can see that she's now gone. And when we leave, a low sound plays and the blades spin counterclockwise, just like in Petscop 6. All of this giving us proof that Lena disappearing is Marvin's fault. In the final credits of Petscop, we are told that Lena is Michael's other auntie, who not everybody can see. Couple that with the text on the grave that says they didn't see her, and you have an interesting case on your hands. 11 years after the windmill incident, Rainer's younger brother, Michael Hammond, is born in 1988. Not much is known about Michael, but we know for a fact that he's Rainer's younger brother, and unfortunately, almost certainly, a victim of Marvin's acts. Rainer is the man behind Petscop. He created everything there is to see in it, and we will certainly talk about him quite a lot, don't worry. In 1992, just 3 years after, Carrie Mark was born. This girl is pretty much the lifeblood of Petscop. Petscop revolves entirely around what this girl went through when she was a small child, amongst Rainer dealing with grief and Marvin committing his acts. Michael Hammond would go missing in 1995 and would tragically be found dead that same year. Though we are never given a proper reason, this is my belief. Marvin has a long history of trying to rebirth people into other people he used to know, and the theming of rebirth is a big one in Petscop. Take for instance, Tiara/Belle. Quote, "I was overeager before, and I started calling you Tiara prematurely. I created a space in the menu for you, still unused now. Then I put you inside the machine and played the second movement of Stravinsky's septet on the needles. I played it wrong, but that would have been okay. If you hadn't given up halfway, you would be Tiara. This is not what happened, and now I'm gone." It's presumably Rainer who is saying this. He tried to rebirth Belle as Tiara because Tiara is a part of the family and Belle simply isn't. But Belle gave up and was forced to be trapped inside the Quitter's room, where she would be for 17 years. This video was uploaded in 2018, however the events of Petscop 12 take place at the same time as Petscop 10. These movements are perfectly synced, and that video was made in 2017. So by that logic, Rainer failed to rebirth her in 2000. Which was the same year he killed himself. So this could have been another factor in Rainer's guilt before he died. Back onto the main point of what happened to Michael Hammond, I believe Marvin attempted the same process this time around in 1995, though not exactly the same. Marvin used a pair of tweezers, the same tweezers that are on Michael's desk in his child library room, to pluck Michael's eyebrows until he was unable to grow them. We know that based off of the child library system. Lena and Care both lack eyebrows. They were unable to grow them. Marvin's secretly excited about this, and as such, he plucked Michael's to try and rebirth him. This obviously failed, and Michael went from being Michael A to Michael NLM. Once again, this is backed up by more dialogue in the game. In Petscop 11, Paul catches Care A, which will be explained in a bit. Care A's description has a line that reads, "My brother didn't want us to find him, because he knew we were all looking for Michael A." He's addressing Michael as two different people, my brother and Michael A, meaning that they're, of course, two different people. In Petscop, kids do have three versions of themselves, A, B, and NLM. A being happy and content, B being worried, scared, or guilty, and NLM being emotionally unstable, never being able to heal ever again. Something happened during this rebirthing event that Marvin conducted on Mike that forced him into this state, and Michael NLM was now born. Notice the words, "didn't want us to find him." He didn't want his family knowing what happened to him, because he knew that they all thought he was Michael A, when in reality, he was a completely different person. But alas, he went missing, died, and Rainer soon found out about this. We know that Rainer started developing the scary part of Petscop in 1996. However, Petscop 17 through 21 all show us that Petscop was around long before 1996. It didn't just exist as a means to talk about Marvin, it was just genuinely a game for the quote, Petscop kids to test. It's unknown when the first ever version precisely came out, though it couldn't have been before 1994 realistically, because the first iteration of the PlayStation came out in 1994. So let's just assume that in 1994, he was making Petscop as a gift for the Petscop kids to test. I made a Reddit post over a year ago on the Petscop subreddit that went over the differences between Odd Care and Even Care, and that Odd Care was actually the pure version of Petscop dedicated to Michael, Care, and all the other Petscop kids. And that Even Care was the version made after Rainer found out about the horrible things Marvin had done to Mike. And it definitely has its flaws, though I think this is partly true. There are 15 generations in Petscop, basically 15 versions the game went through before Rainer stopped creation of it. In Generation 3, we hear the Odd Care music. same with Generation 4. Note that both these times we witness Mike, Care, and Belle all playing Petscop. In Generation 4, we also see many other children playing the game, plus the addition of Amber's room. It's unclear what generation it was when the newmaker plane was added, though I suspect it's either Generation 5 or 6, and it all has to do with this sign here. Simply put, in Odd Care, it addresses the pets as one, because that's all they are, just pets. But presumably in Generation 5 and onwards, due to the music change and in general much more updated theme, the sign may have changed to say find somebody that you love. In my opinion, this change was made because of the introduction of people being added into Petscop, i.e. being able to catch Care A, B, and NLM, as well as the egg. We're also given this message that Belle caught every pet in Even Care, aside from Toneth, who isn't here yet. Toneth, in case you don't remember, is a pet that is locked under the newmaker plane. It's essentially a corrupted pet, with extremely random and disturbing dialogue for its pet description, and we literally see Marvin manipulating the game while Toneth is on screen. But Generation 5 is also the version that all of the Petscop kids played. You know, Kyle, Kate, Joel, those random people. And it's only Generation 6 when we see Marvin play the game for the first time ever. And the final nail in the coffin is that Michael Hammond has a replay file of him playing Petscop in Generation 5, meaning that Gen 5 must have come out in 1995 because he was still alive then. However, Michael has no known playthrough of Generation 6 and onwards. All this to say that it is the 6th version in 1996 when Rainer begins to update Petscop to include the horrible things that Marvin has done, all hidden underneath a cheat code that only Marvin knew of thanks to the note, not to mention the date on the note, June 13th, 1997, the release date of Petscop. After all of that, it seems pretty fucking likely that Marvin is the man who killed Michael. However, just a year later, Marvin would blow that out of the water. It all starts with Anna, Marvin's wife, kicking him out of the house. We're shown a calendar in Petscop 11 that has multiple days highlighted in green. Big thing in Petscop is color coordination, and Marvin is heavily associated with green. These days highlighted are the days that Marvin is allowed to see his daughter Care. It acts as a sort of custody calendar when Marvin can and can't see Care. After kicking Marvin out of the house, Anna started to paint over Marvin's side of her bedroom, going from green to black. She also covered up the stencils that are on his side. The stencils are the third casket in Petscop. We're never allowed to see the stencils since they're censored, but that's what they are. She enlisted Rainer's help with the painting as well. At the same time, Rainer witnessed Care dancing around the house, which is symbolized in the second casket, the upside down red pyramid that Paul is seemingly disgusted by in Petscop 9.
What the fuck?
This also just so happened to be Rainer's reaction as he explains he was stunned by pure horror and disgust, just like Paul. Later, Anna would pin 2 notes to the billboard, one containing a list of objects, most definitely the caskets, and the other note being addressed directly to Rainer. My husband may come here after 6 p.m. Please stay overnight if you can. Thank you so much. Signed with a little flower at the end, kind of like in the end credits. What the note says is very true. Marvin broke into the house when he wasn't supposed to be seeing Care. He jumped through her bedroom window at exactly 6:15 p.m. and took her away from home. This is also evident in the driving scenes, where we as the player in a demo sequence are taken up an extremely long road that ends abruptly at a concrete wall just as the clock hits 6:15 on its side. Marvin kidnapped Care on June 5th, 1997 at 6:15 p.m. And here is the part that no one really talks about. I believe that Rainer was there when it happened. Watch what happens shortly before Care is kidnapped. Paul goes into the closet and the door shuts behind him, locking him in there, forcing him to see what happens to Care. If we think about this legitimately, Rainer wouldn't be able to put this kind of kidnapping cutscene in the game if he didn't witness it. He would simply allude to it like he does with Michael Hammond when he just talks about him rather than actually having a sort of cutscene. With both Lena Leskowitz and now Care, we're given sort of cutscenes for both characters because there is visual proof that those things happened. In Lena's case, it was the pictures from 1977, and in Care's case, he witnessed the kidnapping take place firsthand. But he was locked in the closet, too petrified to do anything about it, and this is where the start of Rainer's guilt begins, as we picked back up on later. On June 13th, 1997, Rainer gives Marvin his copy of Petscop, with the newmaker plane and the text accompanied with it, and the note with the instructions on how to enter the newmaker plane. Keep in mind, This is only Generation 6, so the bunker leading below the newmaker plane is not added yet. Marvin's gameplay in Gen 6 is quite short, being abruptly cut off and replaced by autosave files. The same thing happens in Generation 7, which is when Rainer starts to actually talk to Marvin. Hi Marvin, Rainer here. You have to be careful this time. If you start running out there without a sense of purpose, you'll get lost. I'm writing this on July 10th, 1997, and Care is still missing. We are searching. Last weekend, we almost got lost ourselves. Your search is harder. Beyond here, there are no landmarks. But this model of a brick building, though crude, should still be familiar to you. Where is this building? We should probably talk about Care's situation. June 5th is the day that she is kidnapped. She's taken to an abandoned school, which Rainer was referencing with the crude model of a brick building. He also explains that they are trying to search for Care and that it's July 10th and she's still missing. The reason Care was even kidnapped in the first place has actually already been said. It's because of Care's lack of eyebrows. Marvin is attempting to rebirth Care back into Lena by putting her into a machine and playing a melody on the needles. According to the calendar, she's being kept in this school from June 5th, 1997 to November 10th, 1997. During that time, Marvin traumatizes Care, doing unfixable damage mentally, and it's here where we see the remaining 2 censored items. The most appropriate one to bring up first is the 4th and final casket that Paul sees in Petscop 23. It's 5 red letters drawn on a chalkboard in, quote, "that filthy building that you inhabit," obviously talking about the school. Now, it's completely and utterly unknown what these 5 words are. However, I think it's an interesting convenience that "do you remember being born?" arguably the most famous line in all of Petscop and one that relates very heavily to the rebirthing theme, is 5 words long. Now this is not confirmation at all, it's just a coincidence, but it's one that I would like to believe. And it's written in red, and the scary thing here is that red is associated with Paul's name, while it's yellow that's associated with Care's name. Now this isn't confirmation that Paul wrote these words. However, due to the popular and borderline confirmed belief that Paul is Care after she was rebirthed, it's not that far-fetched to say that Paul wrote this. But you might be wondering, how the fuck was Paul able to write this? Well, like I said, if Paul Leskowitz, a member of the family, is Carrie Mark after she's been rebirthed into him, perhaps Care was successfully rebirthed into Paul in this time, and this question, "do you remember being born?" was directed towards Paul in his new life. Though, as I will say many times throughout, this is simply an interpretation that I choose to believe is right, and you can interpret this however you want. But I have one more thing that I would like to say about this kidnapping situation. 20 years later, in 2017, in Petscop 11, Paul goes back to the school inside Petscop this time, and meets with Marvin. Marvin makes Paul play the needles. However, this time Paul messes up the music, which cancels out the rebirthing process. Marvin says she tripped and fell and is lost, and then asks Paul to stop. Paul apologizes, and Marvin then says that Tiara also plays bad music, when her name is actually Belle, who played bad music. Though like Rainer said, "I started calling you Tiara prematurely," so maybe Marvin is still hopeful that one day he will turn Belle back into Tiara, and as such addresses her as that. Or maybe it's something else. Towards the end of the series, Paul once again goes back to the school and retrieves Care B. Then he enters the room with the machine and puts her in the machine. He once again messes up the music, and Marvin then says to Paul, "Fuck, stop, stop." Interestingly, if you look at the captions for Petscop 11 and 23 respectively, 11 says that the music being played is Care's melody, and in 23, it's Paul's melody. Petscop 23 shows us the process of Care being rebirthed into Paul, and is a fitting conclusion to the series. Considering 24 is a credits sequence and the soundtrack has one cutscene at the end, 23 is basically the big ending. In the ending, we witness Paul, a character associated with red, turn Care B, a character associated with yellow, into an egg. The color of the egg is red and yellow, signifying both those people are one and the same. At the end of Petscop 23, he leaves the basement and goes up to the first floor. There's no music this time around. He inputs the combination and puts the egg inside the locker with the purple and pink egg, along with the new life letter addressed to Tiara Leskowitz written by Lena. All 3 Leskowitzes reunited in a way. It's nice. Not to mention, the pink and purple egg could be Belle and Tiara being successfully rebirthed in the ending of the series too. If you remember, the only time we ever saw Tiara's name in dialogue was way back in Petscop 3 in 2017, and her name was written in purple. And Belle is capable of modifying the game to write text in it, as we see in the form of Pink Tool and also in Petscop 15, when Paul can modify the game's textures to write words in pink coloring on them. Pink and purple, Belle and Tiara. successfully rebirthed. And this is finally confirmed by none other than Paul himself when he corrects Tiara in the true ending to Petscop in the soundtrack. Tiara says, "I could not wait to be your friend." Then Paul corrects her to say, "family." Tiara is Paul's sister, and Lena is Paul's mother. When you really think about it, it's a beautiful ending, but we're not done yet. One last thing to go over before we go into post-1997 Petscop is the birthday party for Care. On the 10th of November 1997, she escaped from the school's basement and wandered the newmaker plane for days in the form of Care NLM. On the 11th, she spent the whole day wandering, seemingly lost in this godforsaken endless field of grass and black fog. But on the 12th, she found the house, which just so happened to be on her birthday. The 12th of November 1992 is when Carrie Mark was born. She's asked why she's covering her face, to which the person asking the question, Anna, her mum, says, "Oh." She then goes on to say that she still recognizes Care, that nose, those eyes, it's still you, which is in reference to Care looking physically different due to how NLM looks different to A. You get it? Then Anna says, "Go ahead, have a slice." "Oh, don't worry about those." To which she points out several drawings of Tool on the table as well. Paul then checks the green calendar. It says November 12th with a birthday cake dancing on it, signifying the date today. He then checks the dates on the previous months, and they're covered in green as expected. But then he checks the red one. Remember that red is the color coded to Paul, and though it still has the birthday cake, there is no green in the previous months. This shows that although Care and Paul are the same person, Paul, as Paul, didn't go through the kidnapping. Care did, and Paul doesn't remember it. If you remember in Petscop 11, Paul mentions that him and Care have the exact same birthday, and that he never remembered hearing about anyone going missing.
And I remember you saying that we are, exactly the same age, right? I just don't remember even hearing about anyone going missing.
Paul figures out that this calendar is displaying the year 2017, 20 years after Care escaped. This is followed up by something very important in this series. Paul walks through the door, yet we hear a bump sound effect, sort of like someone running into a door. This one sound effect is extremely important. It means that Paul just ran into a door, right? But he didn't. He went straight through and is in the bedroom. Well, it's because the door, in fact, never opened. Sound familiar? It's the answer to the cryptic riddle in the beginning of the same episode. At the start of Petscop 14, Paul is given a riddle, or whoever is playing is given a riddle. In the first picture, let's say 1997, the door is closed. Care ran straight into the door because it is closed. In the second picture, taken later, let's say 2017, the door is open, which is why Paul ran straight through it. Nobody opened the door. The door didn't open itself. The door, in fact, didn't open at all. What happened? Well, you already know what happened. Two separate points in time. This is even answered a second time before the birthday scene. In the regular version of the house, not the birthday version, Paul figures out that his movements are being saved and replayed exactly the same in a demo state at a later time. His exact movements.
So I've actually seen recordings that it made of me from a year ago. And I had not seen that, recording in the time between, so it was holding on to this thing, and it only decided a year later to play back. There are also recordings that I assume are stored on the CD or might even be scripted. In one of the recent videos, this was one that went on the public YouTube. I lost the video. I lost it. I had the audio. The game had the recording. Even there were two parts to this session. It had both of them. It played them back 2 different occasions as demo recordings. I got them. Okay, so here's the thing. Demo recordings can be different, right? They can be different from when I was playing. So when I caught all of those pets and it showed the text, that was different from what it showed when I was playing.
He also happens to know that the bedroom door is open in the demo version, but closed in the regular version. So he manipulates the game to go through the door in the demo mode, while Paul in the real mode runs into the door over and over again, hoping he makes correct movements.
And this idea involves pretending that this door, right here, this one, is open rather than closed. And if I were to pass through this doorway, what would happen? Would I bump into a door? No, because the door is open, right? I would just keep going into the room that's there. And I happen to know, I'm going to walk into the room right now. I'm in the room. I happen to know what this room looks like because I saw it in a demo recording just today.
Then watches them back again in the demo sequence that is played later but overlaid in the YouTube video for a better viewing experience. This can also explain why Petscop 13 is a demo sequence, yet Paul is still talking and moving perfectly in sync with it.
Looks like we finally made some progress. I think.
It's because he lost his video footage but kept his audio, but the game kept his video footage and played it back as a demo. This could even go as far as to explain why sometimes we see two identical sets of movement. Take for example the clone in Lena's room in Petscop 9, or Paul walking into the bathroom in Petscop 11. Two moments that are exactly the same, happening at different points in time. It's a loop that must be closed. But back to the scene in the bedroom itself. Care, are you okay? You ran straight into the door. Did you think it was open? Oh, poor baby. Soon enough, music kicks in and we're given entirely different text sound effects as Care begins to speak. It's much deeper. She says, "Where's the disc? Where are the discovery pages?" Anna is confused to say the least. Paul says, "Wait a second." Anna says, "What are you talking about? What disc? Discovery pages?" Care then says, "Jill, stop fucking ignoring me. Get in here and show me where that disc is." Anna says, "No, Care. This is mommy. This is your mommy. Sweetie, I'm right here in front of you. There's no one else here. What are you looking at? What's over there? Care, can't you hear me? Can't you see me waving? Snap out of it. Care, where are you going?" No, this is some pretty disturbing text to be honest, but it does have meaning. Like everything in this fucking series. This is another thing that I've made a Reddit post on back in April of 2021. I made this. Once again, it doesn't hold up too well, but it does highlight one important thing. In this situation, Anna and Care are in two different points in time. Anna is in a version where the door is closed, yet Care's movements in the other version carry over to the version that Anna's in. So Care sees the stuff in the bedroom perfectly fine, however it would look extremely confusing to Anna because from her perspective, the door is closed and Care would look like an idiot wandering around asking where things are. But it gets deeper when Paul says that the dialogue being spoken is based off of a conversation he had last year with Jill.
I think that was based off of a conversation that I had last year on my birthday. If it wasn't just a coincidence, then that means I'm getting pranked. Game froze. I have to call Jill right now.
This is further proof that, again, Paul is Care, but we've already been over that. It goes to show that Paul might have gone through the same thing as Care. However, I have a more interesting theory that I would like to present in a little bit, because one last thing that happened in 1997 is Christmas Day. In Petscop 11, when Paul enters the house for the very, very first time, we're given text from Anna that says, "Where have you been? Why were you gone for such a long time?" This is Anna asking Rainer where he's been since June of 1997. The channel description at one point dead set confirmed this, saying that they received this gift, talking about Petscop, on Christmas Day of 1997 and 2000. We were all certain he was dead at the time because he had been missing since June 1997 and 2000. Regardless, he gets home with this gift on Christmas Day and gives it to the family. This Christmas version of the house has two calendars as well. The first one, the green one, shows Christmas occurring on a Thursday, which by checking past calendars corresponds to 1997. The second one, the grey one, has Christmas on a Monday, which corresponds to 2000. The same exact years as the channel description. Now, is this another example of someone being gone a very long time and coming back in two different versions? Just like the Anna and Care cutscene? In my opinion, yes. Rainer was gone searching for Care for so long that the family assumed that he was dead, which explains their disbelief when he returned to give them the gift. As a side note, on the 24th of December 2017, the channel About section updated to mention this. Paul created some additional recordings in 2017 as a way to show Petscop gameplay to his friend. He created this account in order to upload those additional recordings in video format. The word additional is really important to me, implying that they were original recordings in the first place. what do you know? Petscop 19 proves that theory right, with 15 generations, 15 discs in Anna's bedroom. However, it's now where we come face to face with one of Petscop's more depressing moments. A theory of mine is as follows. Rainer had informed Paul, the player of Petscop, that Paul himself was the newmaker. He is in charge of turning Care NLM back into Care A and closing the loop. This is the goal of Petscop as a game, to close the loop, and to stop letting history repeat itself, as we've already seen in the form of Care and Anna in the house, and to an extent, Rainer returning in both 1997 and 2000. Rainer left to search for Care in hopes of turning her from Care NLM back into Care A, but he failed. He failed to find Care, failed to change her back, and failed to close the loop, and is filled with guilt because he let the kidnapping happen in the first place, not to mention failing to expose the person who killed his brother 2 years prior, and the man behind the mysterious windmill incident all those years ago in 1977. So on Christmas Day, 2000, he returns to the house, gives the family his gifts, the recordings of Petscop, and as the family sit down and watch his gift on TV, he asks to use the bathroom. Anna asks him to hurry up, to which he responds, "I'll come out in a minute. Keep playing." Rainer then kills himself in the bathroom. This is all but confirmed by the name of one of the songs in the soundtrack of Petscop, Bathroom Tomb, which showcases the garden and even Care that is linked to the house as shown in Petscop 13. Rainer was a good guy, but he failed to close the loop, and it now depends on Paul to close the loop and stop letting history repeat itself. My theory was more focused on the 2 years and the closing the loop thing. Rainer killing himself was already a confirmed event, and that marks the end of everything before and during 1997 for Petscop. Now we focus on the events after 1997 and how they tie into the storyline. The first big event that happened after 1997 was when Paul's mother, Lena Leskowitz, had ownership of the game in 2004.
Yeah, well the thing is, it's not here now. There's not even a passageway or anything. Can you remember when you saw this? Well, it could have changed between then and 2004. After 2004, my mom had it reportedly.
Lena is most likely called Boss in the game because she is the boss of Garalina. If you remember in Petscop 23, Paul goes into the Garalina office, if you will, and comes across multiple rotating party hats that are emitting a quote, boss noise. Garalina is also a compound word, garage and Lena, most likely meaning that Lena was also a part of the game's development alongside Rainer, and it was developed in the garage of the house as we're seen in Petscop 14. Paul tells us this in Petscop 8 after he finds Marvin inside Petscop, and Marvin seemingly walks up in the sky for no reason. It may look confusing, but like I mentioned before with the door riddle, the same thing yet again applies to this. Marvin is in a different world in Petscop, at a different point in time, a version where he is able to walk left, and where there is a staircase leading upwards at the end of it. This is shown off in Petscop 20 when Marvin goes to the newmaker plane. He goes down into the bunker, down a flight of stairs, into the casket room. This is where we see the 4 caskets. This is where we see the 4 caskets, uncensored but also unfinished. Rainer makes it clear that once they are done, they will be great, and anyone that sees them will become a part of the family. And it's now when we see the final casket, which is ironically the first one that Paul sees way back in Petscop 7. It's a red vase with a daisy, and a reflection on the vase. This can be seen by going into the child library and inputting the face of Care's eyes and nose with Michael's eyebrows. In other words, it's Paul's room, and this is Paul's reflection, which is why he is so shocked the first time he sees this casket. Quote, "You showed Care her red blurry reflection in a vase. You said, 'Do you see that? Look at how ugly you are now.'" This is Marvin talking to Care after she had been reborn into Paul and looked completely different, though Anna in Petscop 14 still recognizes her. As a side note, each of these caskets have a red theme to them. Red words, red vase, red pyramid, and red stencils. Care squinted her eyes. The reflection wasn't clear at all, but as you began to describe her grisly deformities, she began to quote-unquote see them. "No one wants to see you like this," you said. Again, Marvin enforcing the apparent belief that no one loves or will ever love Care, which is what put her into the NLM status. We're told that she bravely escaped home and was able to clearly see herself in the bathroom mirror. This basically details what happened during the school to an even further degree, though we're talking about what happened after these events. My point here is that this is in Generation 8, which is clearly an earlier version of Petscop that Paul does not play, yet someone remembers it being there before 2004. After 2004, Lena Leskowitz had the game. This also means that before Paul's version, the office room didn't exist. Not that it's much of an insane importance, it's just more food for thought. Another important detail to know is that the Care dancing sign replay file is also from Gen 8, meaning that Raina exposing Marvin and Care playing Petscop exist at around the same time. And if Gen 7 is where Care is missing, that means the Care dancing sign replay is from after Care has escaped home. Some of you may know that the whole of Petscop 21 syncs perfectly to The Sign by Ace of Base. It's on the surface a cool reference because Care is also dancing around a sign, but when you look deeper into the song's meaning itself, we see something kind of nice. The Sign, from the album of the same name in the US, tells the story of a man and a woman in a complicated relationship. Both of them wonder where their relationship is headed, and the man leaves for a while to ponder the problem. The answer to the problem is left to the listeners to decide on an ending. A man and a woman in a complicated relationship seems pretty close to Marvin and Anna. The answer to the problem is left to the listeners to decide on an ending. That too is a perfect explanation that represents Petscop in a great way. I've already explained, it's up to you to decide what ending you like best. After the kidnapping happened and Care safely returned home, she started seeking a counselor during school hours to help manage her trauma. When Paul walks through the girl picture on the wall in the school, we're taken to a room with white mist and 2 seats and a table. A sudden change from daunting music and blindness in the school to a quiet area with calm colors and a heaven-like theme that could be representative of the cathartic state that Care was in. In other words, Care is recovering from the trauma that she faced in the 5 months she was in the school for. The whole conversation between the counselor and the Care is extremely long and drawn out, and is probably one of the most complicated parts in all of Petscop, but we get some really important details about Care and other people as well. The event begins with the counselor saying, "Hi there, sorry to pull you out of class. I know you've been busy trying to catch up. Don't worry, I just want to talk with you. Hey, do you want to play a game? You can pick any game you want, and we can play it together." We get a choice of 4 games: Grave Robber, Checkers, Rotation, and Accident. The last one really caught my eye, because the symbol on the accident box is the same symbol we see animated in the window outside of the tool room down below the newmaker plane. It's hard to see, but it's there. It is animated in a sort of stop-motion fashion. At first, the 2 pieces are far apart, then slightly closer, then they are connected. Then the animation reverses itself and then repeats. Now, this obviously means something, and once again, I believe it's representing the rebirthing process of Care and Paul. How can it not be? I mean, the color coordination in Petscop is so incredibly useful to know, just like the red and yellow egg. And I think the reason there is far more red than yellow on this piece is because Paul has spent more of his life being Paul than being Care. Care was Paul's childhood. It's why Paul has no recollection of these events, and why he never remembers hearing about anyone going missing. It was so long ago, and Care was so young. Paul then selects Grave Robber. Grave Robber is kind of like Battleship. Oh, you already know Grave Robber. That's good. I don't like explaining things. This is probably Daniel/Rainer talking when before it was the counselor. After all, it's still him who is writing this dialogue after all this time. The counselor saying he doesn't like explaining things would be simply too random for this series. Rainer saying that would be believable. After all, instead of trying to explain his findings to the family about Marvin, he instead created a game that did the explaining for him once looked deep enough into. After a bit of playing, I believe the counselor says, "I called you several times and you didn't come. Do I have the wrong name here?" At this point, you're probably confused as to why I'm choosing to say Rainer or the counselor, and to be honest, it just depends on the dialogue being spoken. This line simply isn't something Rainer would say. It doesn't apply to anything that Rainer's been through, but a counselor trying to call a child's name and getting it wrong is realistic. You gotta really think here at this point. I noticed you named your file Strange Situation. Is that your name? Please confirm. This can be constructed in multiple ways. The counselor mistaking Care/Paul's name, Rainer trying to get the name of who's playing. But this line really stumped me for a while. It was just so out of the blue. It's obvious that the counselor isn't saying it, but it seems too random for Rainer to say it. My theory is this. Petscop isn't a game created solely to expose Marvin. Back in the day, a lot of us thought it was, but with these last few episodes, it leans much more towards the aftermath of the situation and how these characters healed and such. Petscop was a game created as a sort of therapy tool, a way to remind Care that she is still loved. You can see her dancing around the sign listening to music in Petscop 21. It all has a sense of aftermath to it. Care is healing, but it will take time. But Petscop is here to help Care heal, especially with this scene here and what the counselor or Rainer says later. A text box drops down, letting Paul input his name, and he does so. Paul, okay. Your turn, Paul. What happened is that the counselor was calling Care's name, but at this point in time, after the kidnapping, Care was no longer Care. She was Paul, as shown in the first casket with Marvin describing to Paul how ugly he was after the rebirthing. Are you right-handed or left-handed? You don't know? Really? Well, which hand do you write with? That one? That's your left hand. That means that you're left-handed. My right is actually your left. Isn't that confusing? Anyway, your turn. During the series, Paul shows several times that he has issues with his left and rights. I won't go too much into detail about this as someone by the name of Mr. Seat has already covered this in a fantastic theory of his that covered rotation amongst other topics in and outside of Petscop. I'll have that linked in the description if you want to learn more about this topic. After more gameplay, we get more dialogue. Moving 5 times in a row was a mistake. Now I can't retrace all my steps. You should dig often. It helps you win. Kids shouldn't say swear words. Do you know why? It just doesn't sound right. You should choose cleaner words, even when you're really angry. This is probably in reference to Kara swearing at Anna and Paul swearing at Jill. That's a very big boo-boo on your face. We're gonna help you. Together. Everyone is. This is most likely talking about the family and that they're going to help Paul recover from the trauma that he went through. It's therapy. The whole family is going to sit down and help Paul through this. When you reach for your shoes will be there. When you walk through a doorway, the door will be open. Wherever you go, the floor will continue under your feet. Every move you make will be valid. Everything you see will become real. Everything you say will become the truth. Your turn. This is, to me, Rayner's way of helping out Paul. Rayner is a very specific kind of person, and this is his way of making a person believe that they will be okay. Basically making them believe that everything they do is right, and no matter what, when that just isn't the case. Rayner mentioned that he just doesn't like explaining things, so maybe he's telling Paul this just to get things over with quickly. To quickly dismiss the situation by telling him that everything he does is right, and that he is a good person no matter what. This obviously isn't a great way to go about helping someone out of a traumatic situation, and soon enough Paul wants to stop playing Grave Robber. Oh, I don't blame you. Grave Robbery is vile. This is an awful game, huh? We can play something else if you want, but Paul doesn't select anything else. He quits out. It's okay. You can go. I hope you can find your real house. Now, this once again is an extremely random out of the blue line that is just so hard to wrap your head around. The real house might be this here. The house that is set on Christmas Day 1997, after the kidnapping, after Care returned as Paul, and has received the gift from Rayner known as Petscop that is the therapy tool that's used to help him out. However, this is a frozen state of the house. This house is frozen in time, so it's either that or it's a different house. The only other house we've ever seen in this whole series is this one here, the painting from Petscop 2 that shows what looks like the same house, though it's green. And as Mr. C pointed out in his video, the doorknob is on the opposite side of the door. It might sound insignificant, but the whole concept of rotation in Petscop, left and rights, etc., beg to differ. Paul does make it clear that he has trouble with his left and rights, and in theory, how to open doors. It's all a bunch of theorizing, but this house in the painting could be Paul's real house. After Paul had recovered, Petscop was kept away from everyone else by Paul's mother seemingly for good. It didn't need to be played anymore. It had done its purpose, helping Paul get through his trauma and finally allowing him to move on, until March 12th, 2017, when Paul finds Petscop and the note with it, and starts documenting his progress videos to his sister Tiara. It's important to note that Petscop's description makes it clear that only select recordings were chosen to be uploaded, and was further expanded upon in the channel description I read out earlier in the video about Paul's additional recordings, while keeping some content private. It's a game about a family after all. Some things are probably too private or too personal to upload for everyone to see. So going off that, it's possible that Paul had some things he was intending to upload but the family wouldn't allow him. Episodes 1 to 4 were unlisted until early April of 2017, when in Petscop 5's description we get the message, "I guess this is for all of you now." And after Paul sees the first finished casket in Petscop 7, the family finds out and forces Paul to give up ownership of the channel and starts using the term "we" instead of "I," while also forcing him to keep playing to discover more secrets. After the abrupt ending of Petscop 10, Petscop 22 takes place right afterwards, where Paul has a discussion with Tiara, who at the time her name was Belle. It turns out that the tool had given him coordinates to where the windmill used to be.
Yeah, I'm okay. What do you think of that picture? Yeah, I looked them up. The top numbers, I looked them up. You're gonna want to look them up yourself. Yeah, punch them in.
Which was censored for pretty obvious reasons. Paul and Belle located these coordinates and have agreed to go there later. And if you remember, the gap between Petscop 10 and 11 was considerably long. In fact, it's the longest the channel has ever gone without uploading, almost 7 months. Paul makes it clear that he isn't recording and that he has stopped it. He also says that he won't tell the family about his discovery until they've seen it for themselves, and that they intimidate him, yet it's clearly recorded. Note that Paul has significantly worse audio quality than he does in the previous video.
That's kind of fun, actually. Going through a 4-hour video. Yeah, I looked them up. the top numbers. I looked them up.
And in my opinion, since Petscop records gameplay perfectly fine, I've always had a theory that it also records the audio along with it. But it's either that or Belle recorded her phone call with Paul, since this conversation was pretty obviously over the phone. Personally, I like the idea that the PlayStation recorded the gameplay and the audio and played it back at a later date. Keep in mind, although this is Petscop 22, it's still based in 2017, specifically May 31st, the same day as Petscop 10, since these events follow immediately after that episode. My theory for the lack of activity throughout June to December 2017 is this.
This is roughly where the windmill would be. Why there isn't actually a windmill here, I don't know.
After the events of Petscop 10 and 22, Paul and Belle go to the coordinates of where the windmill apparently was. It's unknown whether or not they find something, but what I think happened is that they found a placeholder of the windmill, just like in Petscop 4. Another thing in Petscop 4 is when Paul was inspecting the placeholder, Marvin could be very faintly seen in the shadows behind him, stalking him and watching him. This was the first time Marvin was ever seen in any Petscop video. I believe this was what happened after Petscop 10, but Marvin kidnapped Paul, just like how he did with Care in 1997, exactly 20 years earlier. Once again, the loop repeats itself. Paul is taken to the school. It's extremely vague what happened to him at the school, but it was most likely a failed rebirthing process to turn Paul back into Care. He escapes and Paul returns to his house on the 12th of November 2017, just like how Care did 20 years before. This time around though, Paul can't find the discs or the discovery pages and has an argument with Jill about it. Moments that repeat themselves in time is a theme in Petscop. It's the loop. It's still unclosed. And with that, when Christmas 2017 came, Paul settled back down, finally agreed to pass ownership of the channel completely to the family, and agreed to record more gameplay to find more secrets and to progress more in the game. You can even hear him talking to the family in the intro of Petscop 11.
And I'm trying to think, when was the last time I saw any of you at all? It had to have been like 1999. I was a kid. I was a small kid. Tiny kid.
He also mentions that he got home and drew a map.
I just came home and drew this big drawing.
That was most likely a map of the newmaker plane as he escaped and wandered it for days. This is all just a theory that I thought of a long time ago and still think is correct in my mind. It's just an interpretation. This long gap in uploads was 100% intended, and in my opinion this is the explanation that I choose to believe is right. I just want to take a moment to point out something I'm sure someone is thinking about. The quitter's room. What is its purpose? Well, in my opinion, it's where Belle went after she failed to be rebirthed. If you remember, she gave up halfway through, and the rebirthing failed because of that. So she spent 17 years in the quitter's room, and Petscop 12 actually follows through with the events of Petscop 10 when Paul was in the quitter's room in that episode. The movements are the exact same, which means 12 is from Belle's perspective at the same time, meaning she was put there in the year 2000. She failed and was kept there, and as Rainer said, if you didn't give up halfway, you would be Tiara. This isn't what happened, and now I'm gone. This is because Rainer killed himself in the year 2000 as well. After this, in Petscop 13, at the end of the episode, we hear a car door sound effect. Paul leaves the car. It's unsure where he is, obviously, but he clearly has to do something. We see the message, please leave the PlayStation on when you leave. You can stand up now. But that's what we saw. Paul makes it clear that in Petscop 13, he was seeing different text, but the demo version that was being displayed in the video had different text, which is the text that we saw. Not to mention there's audio that is almost completely suppressed in the end of Petscop 13, while there is also knocking on the car window. This could be Paul talking to someone or vice versa. Since Paul was in a car in Petscop 13, where is he in Petscop 14? Well, he's at home. And the only reason I think this is because he ever so subtly acknowledged his cat halfway through the video.
Cat, what are you doing? Stupid. Oh. Yeah.
He wouldn't be playing Petscop with his cat inside a car. That's just too random for this series. He's at home playing this game. But what about 16? That's where we are shown the ghost room and the testing room. And Paul has a tracker on him, and he hasn't had any controller input in a long time. Well, in the multiple months we waited for Petscop 16, the family had moved Paul to this testing room to find more hidden content. On January 26, 2019, after Petscop 16 was uploaded, the About section changed to say, some select Petscop recordings. In a way, recordings have the power to raise the dead. they're kind of scary, currently hunting for hidden content. The raising the deadline just means that through recordings, you can relive memories of people who used to be alive who are now no longer alive. Take for instance Mike and Daniel Hammond. And I believe they put Paul in the testing room and forced him to find hidden content that would end up being the sound test Easter egg menu, where Paul can go through pet sprites, the room impulse, and all of the replays of everyone who has ever played Petscop ever. After Paul had finished his long Easter egg hunt in April of 2019, according to the channel's description on April 21st, just after Petscop 21 got uploaded, it seemed like they had gotten the information that they needed. Paul then comes back in September to finish off what he started. First in 22, he goes to the counselor room. Petscop 23, when he tells Marvin what room he's in, Marvin finds Paul, then goes back to the school for the last time to rebirth Care B into the egg that represents Care and Paul being the same person. And 24, when he can finally access the book of baby names and the credit roll. This, coupled with the last line being added to the description the same day these 3 videos were uploaded, saying, "Thank you for watching," really does sound like an ending. And it would all come to an end on November 28th, 2019, when their soundtrack was uploaded. The final thank you was said, and the last bit of dialogue was added. Belle/Tiara is Paul's sister. Lena, the boss, is waiting for her 2 kids, and Belle/Tiara says to Paul, "We can investigate this together." The same words that Paul said all the way back in the beginning of the series in 2017, almost 3 years earlier.
We can investigate this together. And maybe you'll find stuff that I can't find here.
And with that, Petscop is wrapped up, the loop is closed, and Paul and Tiara Leskowitz investigate Petscop together. In 1968, Lena Leskowitz would be born into her family, with her sister Anna Leskowitz as well. On Lena's 9th birthday, in 1977, she goes to a windmill with her sister and her friend, Marvin. They take a photo together. Minutes later, Anna takes another photo, with just Marvin and no Lena and no windmill. The windmill and Lena both vanished off of the face of the earth, and Marvin would go on to marry Anna. In 1988, Michael Hammond would be born, with his brother Daniel Hammond, who was born a while before Michael. 3 years later, Carrie Mark would be born on November 12th, 1992, with a mum named Anna, a dad named Marvin, an auntie named Jill, an uncle named Thomas, and 2 cousins, Daniel and Michael. Daniel begins working on Petscop alongside Lena, and they develop Petscop in the garage, hence the name Garalina. They give the first few versions to the Petscop kids, and they let them test it out for them. In 1995, Anna would inform Marvin of Care's inability to grow eyebrows, which secretly excited Marvin. Marvin attempts to rebirth Michael back into Lena by plucking his eyebrows with tweezers, the same tweezers that were found on his table in a child library. But just like Tiara said, young people can be psychologically damaged beyond the point of rebirthing, which is what happened to Michael. He couldn't be rebirthed, and as such, he went missing and died in 1995. Daniel, suspicious of Marvin, begins the development of the newmaker plane in Petscop in 1996 and completes it in 1997. Earlier the same year, Marvin was kicked out of the house he shared with Anna, and Anna enlisted the help of Daniel to paint over Marvin's side of the bedroom black to cover the stencils. As he painted, he watched Care dance around the house. The way she spun around disgusted him, and he was stunned. That Saturday, Anna would pin a list of objects to the billboard, the caskets, and he began to put them in the game Petscop. On June the 5th, Marvin would get his revenge and break back into the house, stealing Care and bringing her to the abandoned school's basement. Anna was suspicious of this happening earlier that day and pinned a note for Daniel to read that was begging him to stay overnight. Daniel instead hid in the closet, too scared to come out and stop the kidnapping from happening. With this in mind, and enlisting Lena's help in the garage in reference to the compound name Garalina, he gave Marvin the 7th generation of Petscop, telling him that he has to be careful this time, and that it's July 10th and Care is still missing. What Daniel didn't know was that Marvin was trying to rebirth Care into Lena so that the two could be reunited again. Rainer finishes off the 8th generation of Petscop, the generation that included the casket room, the message of Michael Hammond's grave that wouldn't go away, and the version that allowed the camera to go up and down in the tool room, as Carrie Mark's voice could be heard at the same time. Marvin would traumatize Care in the rebirthing process, telling her that no one would ever love her again because of how ugly she was after the rebirthing that had happened. After Care had been rebirthed into Paul, Marvin asked him if he remembered being born by writing it in red, the color associated with him, on the blackboard in the classroom. Rainer also set out to try and find Care. He almost got lost looking for him. Rainer never found her and failed his attempt to close the loop. He once thought of himself as the newmaker, the person in charge of closing the loop, but now it seemed like he had failed. Out of guilt, Rainer returned back to the family on Christmas Day, 1997, with Petscop and its generations, and gave them to Anna as a gift. Care/Paul escaped, covering their face in belief that they were ugly, not to mention them being in the NLM state. They returned home on November 12th, 12th, as Raina mentioned in Petscop 17th. When Care got back, because this is 1997, she ran into the bedroom door and had an argument with her mother Anna about the discs and discovery pages. It wouldn't be explained for another 20 years. After the birthday incident, Care/Paul would seek therapy in the form of the Petscop counselor, as they were helped through their troubles, telling them the whole family would help them and that everything they did was right. Through the trauma, Paul surfaced. With no recollection of the tragedy, Paul Leskowitz, Lena's son, was able to move on, rebirth. In 2000, Rainer attempted to rebirth Belle into Tiara, and he was excited, calling her Tiara prematurely. He put her in the machine and played the second movement of Stravinsky's septet on the needles, a piece of music that is in 3 movements, with the second movement being described as the transition from his older style into his newer style, kind of representative of the rebirthing process. Rainer messed it up, and Belle gave up on the rebirthing. As a punishment, Rainer put Belle inside the quitter's room, where she would stay for 17 years. Rainer, out of guilt, would come back to the house on Christmas Day 2000, give Anna Petscop and all its 15 generations finally complete, and as the family sits on the sofa watching his gift, he goes into the bathroom and kills himself. His last words inside Petscop talking about how they won't give him a picture of Care B, and that they're all scattered in graves and he's a piece of shit. In 2004, Paul's mother, Lena, would have ownership of Petscop and preserve it, keeping it away from everyone else until 13 years later. On March 11th, 2017, Paul would find the game and create the Petscop YouTube channel. He would begin to play it and document his progress on it to Belle, his friend. On April 8th, Paul joined Reddit and told people about the channel and that, quote, there's something hidden inside it. In Petscop 7, the family find out about Paul recording this game, and they see that he has witnessed the first finished casket that has his reflection on it. They force Paul to give ownership of the channel to them and force him to keep playing to uncover more secrets. He discovers the next episode that there exist older versions of the game before 2004, and Belle apparently knew about this too. After the events of Petscop 10, where Paul asks where the windmill used to be, him and Belle agree on a date where they can both go there. Paul cuts the recording, but the PlayStation still records his every word and movement, which is eventually played back in an auto replay in 2019. He mentions how the family intimidate him and he doesn't want them knowing about his discovery. Paul and Belle go to the windmill in June 2017, exactly 20 years after Care was kidnapped in June of 1997, and the loop is still open. So Paul is taken to the school for 5 months, which is why the channel went silent for so long. During that time, Marvin gets Paul to play the Needles piano for him, but he messes it up. Marvin mentions that Tiara played bad music as well. Soon enough, Paul escaped home for his birthday in 2017 and had an argument with Jill about the discs and discovery pages, telling her to stop lying to him and to get in there and show him where the disc is. These words were what Anna was hearing Care say back in 1997. Another instance of the same thing happening in 2 different points of time. The unclosed loop. When he got home as well, he drew a map of the newmaker plane as he wandered it for days. On Christmas Day, he began to start playing Petscop again and used his map to locate the house. Paul left his car at the end of Petscop 13 after having a conversation with someone who was tapping on his car window to get his attention. Audio was suppressed from the video, but very faint words can be made out. He leaves his car and Petscop 14 is recorded simply inside his own home. After the abrupt end of Petscop 14, the family put Paul inside the testing room and forced him to find more hidden content in the game, as we can see in Petscop 16, and the channel went on a 5-month hiatus. When it returned, 5 videos were uploaded at the same time, all of which utilized the new content found by Paul when he was inside the testing room. Paul would come back to Petscop once again in September when he told Marvin his location, and Marvin went to the testing room he's in and got him out of there. Marvin is technically Paul's dad, as shown by the family tree and Paul trying to spell out dad in the in-game language. Perhaps Marvin set him free of the ghost room, allowing Paul to continue returning to the school and retrieving Care B from the basement. He put Care B in the machine and put 500 pieces in, as Belle put the other 500 pieces in, to make 1,000 pieces for the machine beyond the school basement stairway. To me, this is a metaphor that Paul only solved half of the story, and we are only given half of the information. The other half has to be interpreted in our own minds. Paul retrieves the egg from the machine, the egg that signified him and Care being one and the same, and he puts the egg in the locker with the other egg that signified Belle and Tiara being one and the same, coupled with the new life letter addressed to Tiara Leskowitz. He closes the locker and leaves the school, and as he walks out, the sky brightens up. Visibility has returned, and Paul accomplished what Daniel Hammond couldn't. Paul, as the newmaker, has closed the loop, and these horrific events will never occur again. History will never repeat itself again. Paul returns to Petscop one last time in November of 2019, as he reunites with Lena Leskowitz and Tiara. Paul corrects Tiara, saying family instead of friend, and the brother and sister begin to investigate Petscop together. So that is the timeline of Petscop, the events of Petscop in and outside of the game, and my interpretations on what happened throughout the whole story. I know that this is flawed, I do, I acknowledge that. I also know that there were some things that I put in this summary that I didn't exactly talk about in the previous 2 parts. Those were topics that I had interpreted or believed and were extraordinarily hard to explain in a cohesive and logical way, so I just went with it in the final summary. I love Petscop so much. Probably too much, but the way this series conveys themes of childhood trauma and grief, all of the characters, the way it showcases supernatural themes, it's all incredible and so unbelievably well made. Nothing will ever be like Petscop. There will never be another Petscop, and no matter what happens, I won't stop loving this series. This is what I have come up with after 2 years of watching this series, thinking about it, watching other people analyzing it, and writing scripts, trying my best to make sense of this series. It's all been a blast, and I'm satisfied with where I have left off. I'm aware that this isn't perfect, and frankly, I don't want it to be. Even Tony Domenico, the real creator of Petscop, has mentioned that trying to get to the bottom of it would completely ruin its whole point. It's something you finish off in your own mind, with your own interpretations and your own personal beliefs and theories. That was mine, and I'd love to see yours. It's nice that after over a year of on and off theorizing, I can finally say that I'm happy with my full interpretation of Petscop. I feel complete, and I hope this made even the slightest bit of sense to you. I'll never have an experience like watching Petscop ever again. So there you are, my full in-depth analysis of Petscop, its themes of childhood trauma and grief, messed up families, supernatural themes, and abuse. I know this was different to everything I've made, but I want to make stuff like this in the future. I have another script that's in the works right now, and I'm hoping to finish that soon, but for right now, I have a couple of thank yous. I want to say thank you to the Reddit user Marco96 for creating an excellent Petscop timeline that really helped me out several times. I want to thank the makers of the Petscop Comprehensive Progress document, as always, for their amazing work. This video literally would not be possible without it. I want to thank the Petscop community, and of course, thank you, Tony. You have made such an incredible series and have done such an amazing job, and I give you the best of luck to whatever you want to do in the future. That's about it. One last time, I'm sorry if this wasn't how you interpreted Petscop, and please don't let my theories impact your thoughts on it. It's not an objective story. You make of it what you can. With that being said, thank you for watching.